Hello, good morning, and a very, very warm welcome to Breakfast with Arup. It's our 51st talk, so that's good. It's super to see you all here again. My name is Farah, and I'm the Marketing and Communications Leader for Buildings London. A very warm welcome to you all. And so to our speaker this morning. Born in Cardiff, Chris was in love with chasing balls and drawing pictures. At school, he balanced his artistic creativity by studying physics and maths. For Chris, choosing to study architecture was a natural choice, as it was a combination of something physical that will manifest ultimately as he started to design buildings. Chris studied architecture at Plymouth University and Mississippi State University. Upon graduating, he came to London in the healthcare and transport sector and subsequently joined Arup in 2005 as he was drawn by our expertise in the design of stadia. Not surprisingly, Chris is passionate about sports. He's a keen Welsh rugby fan. However, he can only speak Welsh when singing the national anthem. And sadly, he's a bit despondent at how his team is currently performing. Chris's portfolio includes Donbass Arena in the Ukraine, Beijing National Stadium, Cardiff City Stadium. He's also spent 4 years in Qatar working client-side for the FIFA World Cup 22, and he also spent 2 years in Singapore designing Singapore Sports Hub on-site. And he's now back with us in London, finishing work on some projects in Doha. Chris also teaches at the University of Westminster, helping students to prepare for the final REBA Part 3 examinations. And so, without further ado, I'm very happy to introduce the very special and talented Chris Dite.
Thank you. Good morning. Thanks to Farah for amazing patience listening to me preparing this, and thank you all for joining this morning. It's great to see so many friendly faces in the room. So, magical. It's a great word, full of different meanings to different people. It's a term that has come back into vogue over the last few years in mainstream culture and also our industry press, particularly when it comes to award season and eulogies about completed projects. However, there has been a consistently magical elephant in the room for much of recent history, and in certain cases, that elephant has been known to fly. Magical things and experiences can enter our lives in many different forms. Let us consider the traditional thoughts of magic, the trick played on your mind, perhaps that leaves us wondering how something has been achieved or with a sense of wonderment. This is at odds with a more contemporary interpretation of what can be attributed to magical in the most extreme of circumstances. As referred to in the TV series Narcos, magical realism is defined as what happens when a highly detailed, realistic setting is invaded by something too strange to believe. There is a reason that magical realism was born in Colombia, where this suspension of belief leads to magical, if not entirely enjoyable, results. Finally, and maybe in the most populist of interpretations, there's a fantasy element to magical, which takes us beyond the day-to-day of life. And this is where Walt Disney and his flying elephants come to the fore. In today's world, those of us in the business of designing buildings and operating built infrastructure are, it seems, continually monitored in increasing detail. From how long we take to undertake a task, to what we deliver, through to sometimes justifying our actions in the months and years after the project is complete. There is an ever-decreasing space for the unknown in our work. This is perhaps a sign of the modern world shifting away from the past in which architects and engineers were highly valued not only for their technical skills, but also how these were applied in an artistic sense. Perhaps this is a sign of the times as to who the clients are for major projects. We increasingly have less opportunity to deliver mega projects for wealthy individuals and families. As a generalization, we are often employed to deliver on behalf of a commercial entity or a government department that need to justify every penny of their expenditure. That said, we are also fortunate to be the generation to embrace amazing new building materials and technologies, which together with the significant changes in how we interact with our built environment, shape the way the world is now experienced. a world which has very blurred edges between the actual, virtual, and digital experience. So why do we crave memorable experiences now more than ever before, when we can seemingly have it all of the time? We are now a far more affluent society, yet we pay a price. We have never been so time poor as a society. Gone are the days of walking around the corner to a 9-to-5 job. Research shows that a huge 82% of us, and I'm assuming a lot of people in this room, are permanently connected to work through smartphones and regularly check their emails outside of work hours. This is a growing trend in the West of us all becoming time poor due to our changing relationship with how we work. Yet we must recognise that this impacts on how we choose to spend time outside of the pressures of the office. As far back as the 1960s, this shift in thinking about what is important to people was identified by academics and economists. A particular Swedish economist, Stefan Linder, describes this at great length in his publication, The Harried Leisure Class, and comes to the conclusion that being busy can make you rich, but being rich makes you busier. A tricky cycle for anyone to navigate. This long-standing trend towards a busy lifestyle has also been influenced in more recent years with the way that we use technology and how individuals can access it. Life is, for more and more people, about sharing their experiences to a wider audience, particularly through social media channels. The ability to check in and share experiences with a group that are not physically with you is trending towards experiences becoming an almost competitive challenge. Recent data from the NFL Super Bowl held in San Francisco last year shows us that 10 terabytes of data was accessed through the stadium Wi-Fi network, with an additional 16 terabytes of data accessed through mobile networks during the event. The total of 26 terabytes is equivalent to around 26 million smartphone photos being taken in a single day. Now, data statistics are interesting to know for some, but however, perhaps the most telling statistic of that particular day is that 85% of all of that data was used to upload to either Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. The day was about telling people you were there. At the same time as this shift towards a busier lifestyle, the way we interact socially has changed significantly over the last 30 years. I physically meet people I consider to be close friends, perhaps for only a few days every couple of years. I don't think that it's particularly different to anybody else in this room. We now live in a global world where everybody is always busy. What this all leads to is an increased desire for the time we spend with our families and friends to create memories, to be special events, and by extension, to be magical. At this point, it would be easy for me to pull up the dictionary meaning of magical and interrogate what that means to me and you. But surely magical is about how you feel about your experience and environment, not the definition in the dictionary. We can ask how we define a magical experience. Well, by its very nature, everybody will have a different criteria for measuring what they consider to be magical. For some people, it's an experience in a specific point in time, a feeling that the stars have aligned. In this circumstance, the role of the built environment can be entirely incidental, even irrelevant. Take as an example a so-called muddy field in southwest England, which pretty much every other year creates the conditions for people to have a magical experience. Indeed, one that can be as monumental that it serves as a pivotal moment in an individual's life. Of course, the muddy field is Worthy Farm in Glastonbury, and it is incredible in some ways to consider how a site with so very few permanent structures, albeit a massive one at 900 acres, can become home for 135,000 people for 4 days. Amidst all the horror stories of traffic, flooding, and of course the fact it isn't like it used to be, there is a consistent narrative from those who attend that consider the weekend to be a magical experience. To some, that is of course linked to their own belief systems and the location of the site. To others, it is about a coming together of people with common interests in one place for a shared experience. And this is something that becomes magical to people. Yet how do we in our world interface with this type of experience? Perhaps we strive for a circumstance that is more influenced by the built environment. This is where, through intelligent and considered design, we aim to create that momentary suspense of belief, a wow moment, a truly individual, previously unknown subjective feeling. This is where we can play a hugely significant role. It goes without saying that the type of building or space you are experiencing has a fundamental influence on how you engage with it. For every foreground, high-octane experience such as those seen at Disney, there is a background introspective space which offers the same opportunity to provide a magical experience. Walt Disney's business, let's not forget, was built from a single character. Indeed, one of his most poetic quotes, many years after achieving success, reflects on this. "I only hope that we never lose sight of one thing, that it all started with a mouse." In almost complete contrast to this are buildings which are conceived to create powerful emotional reaction and the responses that we feel to an individual space. A beautiful example of a building that achieves this is Taido Ando's Church of the Light in Osaka, Japan. The building is conceived as a series of simple walls which bring the visitor to a chapel space dominated by a single feature, created by light. This space is extremely minimalist, a deliberate use of a single material, in this case reinforced concrete. It somehow gives the space a feeling of peace and calm that allows the visitor to perhaps have a more sedate and introspective experience, but one that is no less magical. It would be easy to underestimate the impact of the built environment has on these experiences. If having a magical experience is about a subjective feeling, either individual or collective, then what does it matter where it happens? And more importantly, how do we as professionals in the built environment create spaces to allow these experiences to flourish? By choosing to be in the construction sector, we all must have a belief in the ability of the built environment to enrich people's day-to-day life. We also have the ability, and to a certain extent the moral obligation, to create spaces that can facilitate magical experiences. It may be thought by some in this room that there is a link between high quality spaces and materials to increased budgets. Yet the example of the Taido Ando building demonstrates that this is by no means an absolute requirement. It is not practical or particularly helpful for a project to have magical as a line item in the design brief. The feeling people experience when occupying space is influenced by not only the building itself, but also the environment within which it sits and the service it provides. There is an unbreakable bond between the terms magical and unknown. Unknown factors are in their very essence things that are beyond the scope of what we're taught, and their importance is easily lost with today's desire to deliver at high speed for almost everything that we do. The incubation time to investigate the uncertain, develop our thoughts, and allow ourselves to be guided by our instincts is now not often created or given. We now require someone to champion the power of uncertainty through a project, typically at a very senior level, and this is a rare commodity. Maybe it's not always the most experienced and oldest people who are the champions and visionaries. We could look at the generational advantage of having younger people who are supported to champion a cause through a project. With this in mind, it's interesting to think about how buildings of the past and present respond to their briefs and satisfy their respective clients. How were design briefs constructed in history? Perhaps if we take this building, the Blue Mosque in Istanbul, and suppose how its client, Sultan Ahmed, defined his requirements. It's clear that it was a statement project, conceived to assert Ottoman power on the city, yet also act as a place of worship and demonstrate the leader's faith. It's also highly unlikely that the building had a BIM management plan or a risk register. Yet the stunning building did have a clearly defined intention and a very strong project sponsor. The realization of this purpose 500 years ago has left a building which has become both an integral part of everyday life for worshippers, but also a space that lives up to and beyond the likely aspirations of the client. The Blue Mosque has also become an I was there location for visitors to Istanbul. If we compare this with a typical modern project, in this particular case, a competition our team was a part of recently. At competition stage, we received the brief that ran to 440 pages. for a relatively simple building with a requirement to return 250 drawings, visualizations, a video, full costing schedule, construction program, and unending tables and project plans. The result of this was that when comparing the competition entries, all 3 finalists were essentially the same. The brief and submission requirements were so tight that nothing was unknown, which is actually exactly what the client wanted, but left absolutely no space for creativity, let alone uncertainty. It was a pretty soul-destroying job. Taking this rather extreme experience leads us to find some examples of some projects that have empowered their designers at a strategic level to develop examples of the built environment that embrace that thought process and value uncertainty in order to deliver the immeasurable qualities that can offer magical experiences to their users. This project, a Maggie's Cancer Support Centre in Dundee, was designed to be a meeting space for people who were in similar circumstances. Technically, this function could be achieved within any building in the hospital complex it's set within, but there was a recognition that the quality of environment provided would offer its users a place that could be more than the sum of its parts. Designed by Frank Gehry, the building takes its inspiration from traditional Scottish dwellings with a solid base, giving a degree of comfort and familiarity to visitors, but including a distinctive and modern roof form, which gives the building a very different identity to a typical NHS hospital. The building design, combined with meaningful and rich landscape design by Arabella Lennox-Boyd, has resulted in a project that can offer inspirational experiences in the most difficult of personal circumstances. At a completely different scale, the Sheikh Zayed Mosque in Abu Dhabi, completed in 2007, is an incredible example of how a modern version of an inherently traditional style of architecture can offer its visitors experience that less considered buildings cannot. In this case, the feeling you experience when visiting is one of immense scale and of incredible workmanship. The building is immense. It can cater for 40,000 worshippers. Yet despite this, it maintains an environment that makes you feel that you are in a much more intimate space that supports its primary use as a place of worship and learning. Closer to home, the John Henry Brooks building, part of Oxford Brookes University, has been developed primarily as a library space, but has also managed to offer its users something more than perhaps the brief had intended to. The inclusion of informal work and study places gives students the opportunity to develop socially and academically in a sublime atmosphere. This is an example of how an everyday building has revealed an unknown in the building design process, how people would actually inhabit the spaces. And this has resulted in spaces in which the building has made a significant positive impact on its user beyond its core use. So if the only way to quantify the unknown factors in our work is through eliciting an emotional response to a building, should we as clients, architects and engineers look to influence projects as an opportunity or as an obligation to enhance the likelihood of the creation of magical experiences? My belief is that we as an industry do not currently place enough emphasis on that final emotional attachment that you get to a finished project. As I alluded to earlier, the process of delivery has become more influential than our appreciation of the skill and craft required to create something special. The opportunity to engage with the feel of a project is often relegated behind cost and program. That's not to say that it's disappeared completely. There is often a space and a requirement for quality, even though this is often treated as a line item rather than as a fundamental driving principle of the project. A large amount of our work, particularly in areas that will be accessible to the public, defines space for the unknown as an artwork budget. It's interesting to note that this actively encourages the unknown. Trust in the artist is given to deliver the final product, and it's unusual for a very prescriptive and precise brief to be given for artwork commissions. As a profession, we do not teach uncertainty. However, we know as a society that we want to buy it through a different route, through people who are trusted to develop this uncertainty, be they architects, artists, or others in the creative world. We are all at the forefront of a movement which is battling the cultural default away from imagination in the built environment by pushing to embrace the needs that we all have to have an interaction with our public and private spaces, we can all help to enhance everyone's experiences. We all strive for high quality design that provides benefit to the users of spaces and buildings. Unless we set out to publicly define our projects as magical, like an organisation such as Disney, then the magical experiences our projects can bring should be about the personal connection that people make to our work, and therefore is predominantly beyond our control. As a society, we do not teach uncertainty. We are increasingly bound by quantifiable things and elements that need to be justified. Without a degree of uncertainty, the magic in our work and how do we inspire others to come with us. The lack of control of uncertainty is perhaps the element which inhabits our ability to embrace the uncertain within our projects. In this, there are interesting parallels that can be drawn from research into how people's relationship with decision-making can be challenged in order to help them find new ways to answer complex and seemingly unknown questions through positive uncertainty. This theory has 4 key areas, but of most interest in the context of this morning is a proposed shift from being practical by choosing actions rationally to being practical and magical. In this, we are encouraged to be practical and magical in what we do, captured in 3 really simple statements. We should learn to plan and plan to learn. We should balance responding to change and causing change. And we should treat our intuition as real. Having confidence in ourselves and our ability to enhance the world around us will enable us all to not only bring enrichment to those who live, work, and play in the environments we create, but also to our own professional lives. So perhaps now is a good time to ask yourself, when were you last allowed to use your imagination? What did you do to bring a feeling of magic to your projects? And when was the last time your work embraced being chaotic, fun, and playful? Thank you. I'm not sure if there's any questions about things like this, but we can try if people have got things things to ask. Yes?
Okay, David Bruce from the FIS. As an industry, are we not under the misapprehension that most clients want a building, when in fact it's a investment vehicle? And the last thing that an investment vehicle needs is uncertainty. So should we be really having a discussion about what society wants from the built environment?
I think you're right. I think we all have to, in this room, the majority of people aren't in the paying for buildings section. I think we can probably say there are some. But I think the interesting conversation for me, for architects and engineers and the creative field to have, is to be engaged with that requirement for the certainty around cost, but also challenge a little bit around value over time. Because quite often, a lot of these things that are practical and magical are seen quite often as a capital cost problem that needs to be resolved. My favourite QS sitting in the front row. But the discussion about value is great until you hit a VE workshop. And then the V bit of value disappears because it's a capital cost issue. So I think there's a whole process for us as designers to be able to describe better value over time, which then has value in an investment vehicle, rather than describing capital cost and must build it quickly. I just think that's got to come a little bit from both directions. And I think it's different depending on what type of building it is. I think for a commercial building, it's very different from a school or from a stadium or from a hospital. I think it depends which sector it sits within.
Yeah, Jeff Taylor, Wiki property developer.
Magical property developer.
Yeah, well, we try. The problem is when design teams argue, this will add value over time. My next question is what? How much?
Difficult.
And they can't tell me. This is the problem. And do you know what? It's always arguing for more capital cost at the front end rather than less. Mm-hmm. So it's a bit of a one-way street. And friend over there is right. There's an investment in this which is linked to most of our pension funds in some way or other. So don't divorce yourselves from it as designers and architects. You're hooked in the same as I am in a different place. I wonder if you've got any thoughts how we might balance that, because we like to do good work and we like to have a bit of fun on the way, but we have to have a bit of discipline as well. So cost and time are important to us.
Of course. I think the interesting thing for me in the sector I live in the stadium world is it's very prescriptive. And some of the commercial stuff that you guys do, I'm sure, is very prescriptive about amount per square foot and all this fun stuff, or square meter. Sorry.
Can we do feet as well?
I'm brought up with feet. I don't know. I've never been able to get it. But I think for me, it's about understanding from your perspective, where have you had parts of buildings and projects that you never thought were going to work, or you thought were going to give you a certain return, but they've actually been much better for you, which is kind of maybe reaching beyond that brief element. It's about saying, we briefed for this to happen, but in actual fact, it turned out really well for us from a commercial side, and then trying to speak to the design community and build that type of knowledge into our designs, rather than just floor plate on floor plate on floor plate on floor plate, maximize, maximize, maximize. Quite often, the magical elements of a commercial development are the elements that hit the ground. Obviously, it's where the common spaces are. I think we're never going to get to a point where we're talking about magical commercial floor plates, unless there's more square feet that you can sell for nothing. But I think what we're talking about is how buildings connect with its external spaces, how buildings offer things in lobbies and communal spaces that perhaps they don't. I mean, we've got a great example here, that we've got a cafe, we've got a great external space here, that I'm sure was absolutely part of the brief, but did we know how it was going to be used when we came into the building? Probably not, and it's turned out really well. So if we can take that type of experience and feed it back into the next projects we work with, then I think that's the way to try and demonstrate value to the more commercially minded, shall we say.
So there isn't sort of value also a financially tangible asset. So for example, iconic buildings, which have a brand in themselves, probably are more equitable than those that don't. So it's really subjective. It doesn't actually increase the tangible financial value of a building by being creative and adding something new and special.
Exactly. I think that works both ways. I think it works both ways. I mean, if you look at, the price uplift for being in the Shard or, Swiss Re in the middle of town, I think that's a positive for a commercial developer. Maybe some of the most famously named buildings in the world, I would hope, have seen their commercial value go through the floor since Trump was voted in, because they've all got his name on them. So, with swings and roundabouts, it goes both ways. You have a positive experience. You can either choose to go vanilla, go, straight down the line, straight out of the brief, straight down the maths route, or you can do that something special and quantify the uplift that comes with that. I think what I'm trying to say here is maybe everything isn't known, but it might be okay that everything isn't known, because you might drive value out of that in a completely different way that you've not thought of yet. It's just hopefully that there's some space for that in the world.
Could you give us a brief little overview of one of your projects where you've experienced your joyfulness, playfulness, and experience put together?
Well, I guess I'm lucky in a way, because I'm obsessed by sport, and that's my thing. And I design stadiums for a living. That's what I do. Clive's just left, actually, one of the guys. So in Singapore, there's a lot of pain. The big dome project that we had at the start there, Singapore Sports Hub, was in our office from 2006, and it opened in 2014. And there's a lot of pain through those years. But you know what? I'm really lucky, because in my projects, I get to go to them when they're full of 50,000 people who are having a great time. And for me, that's really important, because I can see my work being appreciated by others. I don't pretend that every stadium we do is commercially successful, but sometimes that's not important. I think it's just about client aspiration and expectation, and if everybody's having fun, 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 people having a great time just gives me the sense of enjoyment around the projects that I deliver. That's where I find the joy.
I wonder whether being magical actually requires the vanilla as well?
Probably a little bit.
Too much magic, it becomes
Disney.
vanilla. Maybe Disney, but maybe just vanilla.
Yeah, I mean, if everything's magical, nothing's magical, yeah? It's like if everything's important, nothing's important. So I think, it's about capturing those space. When I talk about a wow moment, a point in time, I think that can be framed by people who design the built environment. We can choose to frame that moment. But yeah, I mean, walking with kids into Disney, it's kind of an assault of the senses. It's, as an 8-year-old, it's awesome. But as a 40-year-old, it's kind of a bit much. So, and the 40-year-olds are the ones that are driving the revenue into the business. So I think you're right. I think, there has to be a balance. And it can be a balance between in your face and introspective. I think that's the same.
I think to me, a big part of it is really listening to the client at the very early stage and having access to the client to hear what their aspirations are, and not just listen to what they have to say, but help to guide their own thinking about what they might want below the surface that they don't know about yet. And so for us, I think introducing that uncertainty and that magic comes at the beginning of the process, because you can't really do it when you're already in the middle of designing. It's really about being in there early and teasing out those special strands of magic that the client always has inside their heart, but they just might not know about it at the time.
Well, it was a really interesting subject this morning because it's not really quantifiable, but all projects ought to have an element of magical design. So every project will bring out something that's unexpected, and the good projects are the ones that create this magic. So the potential's there in all projects, and I think it's a lot to do with the team, a lot to do with the inspiration behind the team, but hopefully working in a collaborative situation teases out something that's not there originally, and the potential is always there, no matter what you want. And as an architect, space and light to me are the magic, the two ingredients, and all projects that use this balance between space and light will create a magical experience. So it's great to have a little bit of non-scientific discussion this morning about feelings and passion that were involved in the design. So thanks.
I think one of the common denominators for us is working predominantly with end clients. So when you work through the usual contractual chain, the usual notion is to de-risk everything. So the belief goes into the product, usually as a controls company like we are, rather than in the creativity and the ability of the engineer. Working with Darren from your controls team and other great guys you've got in your teams, we've just delivered a fully open source BMS system. It's working brilliantly, and it did take a brave client. But that brave client who believed in the engineering capability, that was the key. And it gave us a little bit of scope to be able to deliver some interesting ways of the users interacting with the building. An aspiration of Mike Trousdale, a great guy for one of your teams.